has jumped out to you through two very underwhelming days for your Dallas Cowboys through free agency?
Well, first off, glad to be back on with you guys. Second, I think I was on with you guys when the coaching search was going on, and we were talking about how poor their process was in finding the new head coach, you know, the way they moved on from Mike McCarthy. And at the time, I think we were talking a lot of Kellen Moore and possibly Mike Zimmer and, you know, ended with Brian Schottenheimer. But the process was so bad, and it's crazy because their process is so bad in free agency. It's almost like the team that has a bad process in coaching searches also has bad processes in roster management and roster building. So it's been a less than exciting start to free agency, and I think the thing we have to understand is that free agency has turned into a 24 to 48 hour deal, not a 2 to 3 week deal that it has been for so many years. So if you start out slow in free agency nowadays, you're probably going to end slow because things happen fast and happen quickly in that day one of the legal tampering period.
Connor, I've been trying to make sense the last 48 hours for why the Cowboys operate the way they do. They said they'd be selectively aggressive this offseason. I'm sure in their standards they're doing just that. But why do you think the reason that they don't sign anyone to multi-year deals, the last one they did was 2021, bringing in Basham, why they don't give up big money on a per-year basis? It's almost as if they act like they've been to NFC championships and Super Bowls. If you could find any reasoning behind that, or just kind of your thought process on the way they've been approaching it.
I mean, I think there's only a couple, like for this season in general, I think there's only a couple things you can point to. It's either one, they are cash poor. They don't have the cash to hand out big signing bonuses to these free agents that demand a lot of money. I mean, it's no secret, but most guys who get signed early in free agency get a little overpaid. And I think that term gets blown out of proportion because it's not so much overpaid, it's that the market has adjusted to the salary cap that's risen so much over the last 5, 6, 7 years that the guys who are making $10 million a year now feels like so much more than the guys that were making $10 million a year 3 or 4 years ago. But the salary cap has increased by huge amounts each year. So it's just more of the market catching up. So it's either a cash issue that they don't have the money to pay those big signing bonuses up front, or two, they just think that their way is the right way, and that's building through the draft, drafting your own guys and re-signing those. But the issue is the last 2 years they haven't really even done that, where they've re-signed their own guys that they've drafted and developed. They lost Chauncey Golston to an affordable $6.5 million per year deal. They lost Jordan Lewis, who's a guy who's a big player for this team and a big hole they're going to have to fill at the cornerback position. So it's really those only two things. I mean, maybe they could go out and make some big trade that nobody's anticipating and really silence a lot of the critics right now. But I think it's one of two things, and it's either they're struggling to come up with the cash to pay these big signing bonuses, which sounds weird to say given the amount of money that we assume that the Joneses have, and then two, they just think that their process is the right process and everybody else is wrong.
And Connor, the question I keep asking myself is, we talked about all the holes this team has. We look at running back, wide receiver 2, cornerback, defensive tackle, linebacker, whatever it may be. And I know they said they weren't going to try to address those in free agency, but you were still hoping maybe they were just lying between their teeth and they were still going to make some of the stuff happen. Any of the 4 external free agents that they've signed, do you think that's now made it where you don't have to draft that position? Or do you think any of the guys who signed, you still have to draft that position, whether it be running back, lineman, defensive tackle, and whatever it may be?
I think every single one of those positions, defensive tackle, edge rusher, running back, and offensive line so far, like they technically, if you look at the roster from 24 and 25, they upgraded the bottom half of the roster with this free agency period, but I think they downgraded from the player in position that they signed in 2025. They downgraded from 2024, so I think they got worse with Robert Jones, the offensive lineman from Chuma Edoga, and I'm not saying that Chuma was some sort of all-pro level player, but I think he was versatile. He was a guy who you could play at left tackle, could play at left guard, and I think Robert Jones is probably not quite at that level. Solomon Thomas is a guy they really didn't have a good backup 3 technique last year, so I guess he's a positive addition to the team. I don't think he's some superstar player. And then Javonte Williams is a guy who's been, floated around on the trade markets for a few years now, and I think he's a downgrade from Rico Dowdle. And then, with the edge rusher position, you lost Chauncey Golston, and that's going to be, you brought in Peyton Turner, and I think that's a downgrade there. So I think you've downgraded from where you were in 24 to 25, and you might have improved the bottom half of your roster just because you had a lot of holes to fill. But it's not there's no, like, I can't even wrap my mind around how people could, be celebrating any of the moves. I mean, you got to make some sort of move to plug these holes, but you're going into the draft with the same exact pressing needs that you went to when you entered free agency, and that's not a good thing.
Connor Livesay, Blogging the Boys, joining us here. And look, you took the words right out of our mouth. I mean, that's exactly what we just said in the last segment, is that you haven't signed any starters, right? And then when you look at the linebacker position, which is even probably right now the biggest glaring hole that you have on this football team, and it's not even close. And you really don't have anybody left. If you want to go ahead and bring back Eric Kendricks and have him, limp through half the season, what do you anticipate them doing to fill some of these holes? Because you're not going to be able to fill them all through the draft. Do you expect them to do anything over the next couple of days, or do we expect to see them do the same thing they did last year when they got a Linval Joseph, when they got a Jordan Phillips, when they got a Carl Lawson, and did everything in August and September?
I will pull my hair out if we go through that again. But, I think a couple names you could look at. They have to add a corner. There's no way that you can go into the draft with, again, there's a couple of decent names still out there. Rasul Douglas, Asante Samuel are two kind of nickel corners that stand out with the loss of Jordan Lewis. So you have to add some sort of corner. We don't know if Trayvon Diggs is going to play at all and how much in 2025. Kalen Carson was not ready to play in 2024 and dealt with injuries for most of the year. And Deron Bland, while he's a really good player, he's had trouble staying healthy as well throughout his career. So they have to add some sort of starting caliber corner over the next couple of days, and that corner market has dwindled down quickly. E.J. Speed's a linebacker that played for the Colts, who played for Matt Eberflus when he was the defense coordinator in Indianapolis. That's a name I could see them pursuing as a depth linebacker signing. So that's a name to kind of look at. I mentioned Rasul Douglas, Asante Samuel. I think Douglas would fit kind of what they like more in a corner with his size and length a little more than Asante Samuel. And then the one name that I keep coming back to at the receiver position is Tyler Lockett, just because his familiarity with Brian Schottenheimer doesn't really fit what they need in a receiver. They need that kind of big body field stretcher, and he used to be that at one time, but his game's kind of changed a little bit, similar to Brandon Cooks over the last few years. But I just think that familiarity with Brian Schottenheimer makes a lot of sense, and you saw DeAndre Hopkins just get a little less, I think, on the market than some would thought, so maybe you could bring Tyler Lockett in for that 1 year, $3 million deal that the Cowboys love to hand out to these older veteran free agents.
Connor, I'm going to ask you to put your big brain on for 2 or 3 seconds. If you kind of had to, in your own way, kind of power rank the guys that have left the Cowboys, the departures, how would you do that, and how it'll affect the Cowboys next year, the biggest losses from their departures?
Jordan Lewis is number one, I think, easily for me.
Agreed.
I think that you could make the argument, and this isn't any sort of slight to Micah Parsons. I know the world's all talking about trading Micah Parsons, and he's not worth it. Micah Parsons is excellent player, but I think you could make the argument that Jordan Lewis was your best defender last year from a week-to-week consistency, the impact that he brought in the locker room, just his toughness, his physicality, the way that he plays the position week in and week out. I think that he's tough to beat as far as one of your key guys on defense. So to lose him, you don't have anybody to really step in and replace him. That's just going to be a huge need that they have to fill. So it's Jordan Lewis one for me. We'll see what happens with DeMarcus Lawrence. I think I'd probably put Chauncey Golston ahead of him just because DeMarcus Lawrence missed most of the year last year. And he's on the decline a little bit, getting a little older, but I still think he's a really good player. So Jordan Lewis, Chauncey Golston is 1A and 1B for me. After that, there's still a lot of their unrestricted free agents that hasn't signed yet. So we'll have to kind of see how these next few days play out. But that's 1A, 1B for me. And I think that both of those guys are big losses because if you brought Chauncey Golston back, you could go into the draft and maybe feel like you didn't have to take an edge rusher earlier. But without Chauncey Golston, and I know they signed Peyton Turner, but I just don't think that that's a needle mover by any means. Edge rusher is still one of those top needs that you have to almost address in the top 100 if you want to get a guy that can step in and play for you in year one.
And what's even more of a kick in the crotch when it comes to Golston is the fact that it wasn't like he got some, market-breaking deal. 3 years, $19 million for a team that likes to quote draft and develop, and yet one of your own guys goes down the street in the division. It just, I like you said, I'm not really sure what the hell these guys are doing. Last thing, get you out of here with this. You're sitting at number 12 in a perfect world. You drop back, you're able to move back. You pick up a pick or two in the process, and you still get maybe a cornerback at 18, 19, 20, somewhere in there. Put your GM hat on, and at this point, I mean, might as well be a clown hat. Who do you like the Cowboys taking at 12 as of today?
It's so hard to say that because what's the saying? Draft the best player available, right?
Yeah.
Well, some of that is draft the best player available at a position of need because you're not going to draft a left guard at 12 with Tyler Smith on the team.
No.
And again, you make the argument, you move him on the right guard, whatever. But the best player available is going to be at a position of need because they have so many needs.
Yep.
You're talking about guys like Ted McMillan at receiver. Ashton Genty's been a name that's been talked about a lot. I mean, I think he's one going to go before 12 now, and then two, I just think they have so many holes on their rosters at more premier positions that they can't draft a running back in the first round. I still think defensive tackle is a need. So I think you want to start highlighting those positions. I mean, Jahdae Barron's a nickel corner out of Texas, does not fit their thresholds for arm length. He's undersized compared to what they normally like to bring in, but does the new coaching staff maybe change their thoughts on that a little bit? Will Johnson, again, coming into the draft, he was everybody's top 5 player, best corner by far, but I think he's fallen out of favor a little bit. Not sure how quick he is, how fast. He's probably not going to run a 40, so I think the long speed's a question there. So I think those are two guys you have to highlight right now just because of how big that need is at corner. And we've seen this team year in and year out. When they go into the first round of a draft with a major, major need and no warm bodies to fill them, they draft that position early. We saw it with Tyler Smith. We saw it with Mozzie Smith. We saw it with Tyler Guyton. When they have a hole, they're going to fill it early in the draft, whether that is the best player available or not. So I think the cornerback position is one you got to highlight right now. And then the edge rushers, Mykel Williams, Shamar Stewart's the guy who's probably going to go before they get on the clock. But the edge rusher and corner, I think, are the two positions that are highlighted and circled pretty bright right now for them.
Connor, great stuff as always. Tell the folks at home where they can find you at on Twitter and X.
Yeah, on Twitter, X, whatever they call it nowadays, at Connor NFL Draft. Working on a draft guide right now, so that'll be coming out hopefully the week of the draft.
Okay.
And that's about it. That's where I write for Blogging the Boys, so you can follow all my article written work on Blogging the Boys and all the nonsense on Twitter that goes on every day nowadays with this team.
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, we'll do this again when we get closer to draft day. Keep up the good work, and we'll talk again soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys.